Welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Julia DiGangi. She is going to put me through my paces. Those of you that listen know that I love to say I can keep up with the best and the deepest in healthcare and tech. But Dr. Julia is a neuropsychologist, thus I'm gonna struggle to keep up here. Who shows you how to expand the power of your nervous system to hold more emotional voltage. As a brain scientist, Dr. Julia knows that your nervous system is your portal to power. She'll show you how to take the pain in your life, your stress, your struggle, your suffering, and transform that energy into your power. Dr. Julia brings tremendous expertise and decades of applied experience serving leaders at the highest levels of power, including the White House, top leadership at global companies, and special forces. That's a cool mix of companies there. Having worked with leaders who've endured some of the highest stakes, highest stress situations on the planet, like those going on right now, Dr. Julia will show you what it takes to unlock new dimensions of your emotional power as you face defining challenges in your own life. She's regularly the keynote speaker for corporate, healthcare, government, and educational audiences. She's published extensively in scientific literature as well as in popular press outlets like the Harvard Business Review, the Chicago Tribune, Psychology Today. She's presently writing a book for Harvard Business Review, the preeminent publication for business leaders. The book is entitled From Pain to Progress, The Neuroscience of Smart Leadership in Tough Times. It's due out, or it's probably out already. Is it out?
It's due out at the end of this year. So I think
okay.
22. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Julia, thank you for taking the time and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and your listeners, Michael.
Awesome. So a neuropsychologist, that just sounds like, when I read that, I was like, uh-oh. It's so cool.
Fancier than it is. It sounds fancier than it is. So a neuropsychologist means I'm a clinical psychologist with specialized expertise in brain function. And the way I really think about my work is I kind of think about it in sort of three ways. I think about your brain, I think about your leadership, and I think about emotional intelligence. Now, leadership, obviously, it's a big word. And I think, obviously, we certainly think about leadership in corporate or political context. But the reason I think that I always say that if I had 1,000 lifetimes to live, I would live it on this altar 1,000 times over, because our leadership shows up everywhere. It shows up in our homes. It shows up with our kids. It shows up in our business. It shows up in the way that we show up on social media. And most powerfully, it shows up in the way that we lead our own lives. And I want to really have I want to have the conversation that you want to have, but I'm really on fire. I don't know if you're aware of this, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
It is.
I'm on fire to have this conversation about mental health, emotional intelligence, and what it all means.
I love it. I was sharing with Dr. Julia before we started, when I told the guys that work in the office here, I said, hey, this is my pod. They always ask me, I head for the podcast studio, and they're like, who's your guest today? I said, I get to talk to a neuropsychologist who specializes in the brain and emotional intelligence. And they immediately said, some of the smartest people that we know have no emotional intelligence. Like, they're just horrible to work for. They're brilliant, propeller head genius, but they just don't have that emotional intelligence when it comes to the human side and dealing and leading with teams. Is that, do you know anything, like, is that like common? Is that uncommon? It's just a question from the group. So I wanted to make sure I got it in.
So can I just zoom out a little?
Absolutely.
First, I think we got to define. The scientist in me is always like, we got to operationalize our terms, right? So what do I mean when I talk about emotional intelligence? And one of the things I
love it.
I think is amazing. So I've been doing this work now for a long time. And the conversation on emotional intelligence, on mental health has grown exponentially, right? So that's so exciting to me, because this is the conversation that is going to change the world. But I will say that I think that we make emotional intelligence unnecessarily complicated. So I'm an academic. And so I love my like diagrams and my charts, and we got a lot of arrows. But I think that, like, I read an article the other day that was like the 12 domains of emotional intelligence. I'm like, what is emotion? So I think that the most powerful definition of emotional intelligence is this: we live lives that can be devastatingly brutal. A lot of us experience trauma, and even those of us that don't experience the most severe trauma, like, life is hard. We experience loss, we experience heartbreak, we experience frustration, we experience betrayal. So pain, I talk a lot about energy, and I mean this quite literally, because your brain is quite literally an electrical machine. So how do we meet the energy of pain in our life with spectacular emotional power? So in other words, when I am frustrated by you, Michael, when I don't think that you're seeing it my way, when I don't like the words coming out of your mouth, who I become in those moments, because those moments are going to trigger me, right? And that's what I'm talking about, pain. So I don't care whether you call pain frustration, irritation, sadness, loneliness, isolation. I'm happy to sort of talk about the brain and like why all of that does map onto this term of pain. But who do I become in my own emotional abyss is the measure of my emotional intelligence.
Okay.
So let's go back to this idea that, you brought up this thing about like empathy, and you can be like really, I think you were saying kind of maybe like you're cognitively brilliant. Maybe you're able to really solve puzzles or problems or do fine, whatever. Part of the problem is like, and really think about this, like, because right now everyone's talking about leadership and they're using these terms like courage, empathy, authenticity, transparency, inclusion. 99% of the time, I don't have any problem being empathic when you're doing it the way I like. I don't have any problem telling you the truth when I know you're not going to have any reaction to what I'm going to say. I don't have any problem being courageous when it's a safe subject. But the second I start to get emotionally activated, in other words, you start to behave in a way that tests the limits of my power, my emotional power, that's when I start to, as a leader, lose my hold on these things of empathy, my willingness to connect to you, my willingness to listen to you. So I think it's incredible. I always say that clarity is the foundation of power. And I think it is so clarifying to say pain and power are two sides of the exact same energetic coin. In other words, I am only as powerful as the amount of resistance that I can hold. And we have no problem getting that in a physical health. Like, I don't go to the gym and I can't lift 25 pounds. And so I think the way to get to 30 pounds is to lift 5. I'm like, I gotta meet that resistance. I know it in an instant. Why does that logic not apply to our emotional lives?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It makes sense when you say it that way. I like the coin analogy, the pain and the power. And I love kind of how you started off too with May is mental health awareness. And I think we've done a really good job as a society taking the not all of it, but taking a lot of the negativity away from mental health and making it an okay subject to talk about. And I think people try to understand a lot more. I know I have children. I have 5 kids. Several of them are teenagers, right? And I monitor their mental health in college as they start their careers and their lives. In not a prying way, right? I do silly things like I monitor their Spotify playlists and see, like, what are you listening to? Is that upbeat, positive, cool kind of music? Or are you listening to, some downward spiral kind of suicidal kind of music? And that's a trigger for me to go, hey, I need to reach out and just be like, hey, what are you doing? How's it going? So I love, I think we can all point to either in our own personal lives or in career where pain causes these triggers, right? And in a leadership sense, it could even be like, oh, I got to go give a performance review to this person who isn't performing well. I was telling my wife yesterday, I said, it's easy to be a leader when everything's going right.
Yes.
And you're a cheerleader, right? And you're like, good job, team. And it's a lot harder to go do the coaching and the, or worse, right? The progressive discipline or deal with an uncomfortable situation. We almost don't want to do it, but we have to do it. And it's painful, right? And it triggers us in many ways.
I could not agree more, as you probably read by my facial expression. So I think that, all power. So I think a lot about kind of this idea of emotional power. My husband's a nuclear engineer. So we're always talking about,
Wow.
different kind of conversations on energy and power. All power means is my ability to have an effect. That's it. I flip the light switch. The effect is the light goes on. So I think that there's kind of three forms of power that human beings have access to, okay, in our emotional lives. So there is the power of the situation, there is the power of the self, and there is the power of the surrender. Now I want to talk just about the first two. So the power of the situation is exactly what you just said. And by the way, I think it's so helpful to understand that it's like a three-legged table. It's truly that each of those things are equally important. In other words, there's no shame in the power of the situation. But the power of the situation is, we need the power of the situation. And in fact, our entire childhood was only the power of the situation, right? Were you gonna get held? I don't know. Was your mom gonna hold you?
Mm-hmm.
Were you gonna get fed? I don't know. Was your dad gonna feed you?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you gave that example about leadership, it was so spot on, because you're saying, when everything is going my way, in other words, I just kind of get to walk into the office and be the cheerleader, or I kind of get to be the hero, or, everyone thinks my ideas are the greatest ones in the room. That does not require me to draw on an ounce of my own power. In fact, the situation is conferring my power in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
My power starts to hit, again, if we go to the physical health analogy, the analog is very clear. I really start to think about how I'm expanding my strength, how I'm leveraging my energy when I start to break a sweat. So when I have to draw back on my own energy and say, okay, how can I really show up in the most powerful way here? I think that is the measure of leadership. And if you really think so, I'm happy to talk about the brain and uncertainty. It's very accurate to say your brain basically has an allergy to the uncertain. I like to make this point because I think it can really be helpful to people. I always say there is like one emotion that people universally hate. So plenty of people are comfortable being angry, right? Anger can be a very empowering emotion. Mm-hmm. Plenty of people like being sad. There's kind of that melancholy or that nostalgia that sometimes can feel nice in a way. Confusion sucks. And the reason confusion sucks is, we got to talk a little bit about the brain for a second here.
Okay.
Your brain is a pattern detection machine. So your brain goes apple, 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 banana, banana, banana. No one's listening to me. No one's listening to me. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So your brain likes to very quickly close the pattern, because that's how we get to move through our lives with relative safety. Mm-hmm. Uncertainty, and if you looked at LinkedIn or you read, like, everyone's talking about the uncertainty of these times. Well, leadership is the most powerful in uncertain times, because now the people around you, the people you're leading, don't get to look to meetings in the conference room or going out to coffee or flying across the country for client engagements. Now, all of those kind of circumstantial, situational cues about context are gone. And the only thing I can look at is my leader's face, my leader's behavior, my leader's emotion. And that's what tells me, am I safe or am I not safe? So you can imagine the tremendous amount of emotion, because it's not that the leader's not afraid, right? Courage is not, I have no fear. Courage is, I still act powerfully, even in the face of my fear. So that, I think, to be able to draw on our own power, mm-hmm. our own vision, in the absence of good contextual cues, in other words, certainty, what is a more powerful measure of leadership than that?
Yep. I often say, leadership is a science, right? There's a skill set that gets developed, and we promote people into positions of leadership that are just very ill-equipped, right? They're not trained, they're not prepared, and then they fall apart, right? They reach this point of confusion with how do I deal with this, and they crumble, disintegrate, literally in these situations. And then we go, oh, they're a horrible leader. Well, we never prepared them. We never educated them, trained them, developed them. We just promoted them. Healthcare is a great example of that, right? We take great nurses and then make them nurse leaders or CNOs or whatever, or directors of departments. And they're great clinically, but they don't have that leadership, lead a team, develop a team, be emotionally intelligent to the needs of your team and the people around you. And it just repeats itself, globally. It's kind of interesting. So I love what you say about confusion, because I don't like to be confused, right? I mean, I'll dive deep into something I don't understand. When somebody said blockchain, which is a healthcare, kind of security thing, I was like, I don't understand blockchain. And I hated that I didn't understand blockchain. So my reaction was, I'm going to learn every damn thing I can about blockchain until I become proficient or an expert in it and can talk about it. So it totally makes sense. I mean, I don't think I think about it that way until you say it. And then I'm like, yeah, I can be angry. I can be sad. I can be comfortable in all those. I can be happy. But I don't like confusion. I don't want to stay in a state of confusion.
Yeah. The two ones that I feel like I just really hate is confusion and regret. Those are the ones that just, they burn, they put our souls on fire, and not in a good way.
I love it.
I completely agree with what you're saying. It's kind of like people can possess amazing technical acumen, right? It's like, I'm a great computer programmer, and then I advance. Does that really mean I'm a great leader of other engineers? I'm a great nurse. Does that really mean that I should be the CNO? And it's how it's such a different skill set. And again, like, I'm not exactly sure why, but for some reason we understand the physical health examples. It just comes more naturally to us. Like, if I'm a great gymnast, you wouldn't necessarily put me on the football field and be like, go girl, touchdown. Yeah. Like, you would be like, oh, that's what she excels in gymnastics. So she doesn't yet know how to play football. But it's like, I think part of the issue is, if you really think about the native emotion, the native language of human beings, is a language of energy, and it's a language of emotional energetics. So there's kind of this, it's not really conscious, but like, okay, they'll figure it out. They know how to talk to people. They know how to have conversations. Like, we don't see it as a discrete skill set that really can be trained. And I 100% believe, like, are some people more natural leaders? Sure. But I think that leadership is something that can be built, and I think it can be built through conversations like you and I are having.
Yeah, awareness, I always say, is a good step, right? Being self-aware. What are my skill sets? What do I need? When I do any type of personal coaching or mentoring, I'm always like, okay, where are you? Are you meeting, exceeding? Where do you want to go? And what skills are missing, right? And that includes the emotional side, right? And that includes, how do you lead teams? Can you lead teams? I've never really related it to the brain, though, but it makes sense as we talk about it.
I don't know how deep you want to go, so I'm going to really let you kind of lead here. But what I think a lot about the headwaters of our life. And I actually, I said that I do three things: the brain, leadership, and emotional intelligence. The truth is, I think our own thinking about our own work evolves. And I actually think that leadership and emotional intelligence are synonymous. I don't think there's a distinction. I don't think that you can lead teams in today's world without the foundation being, how do I engage in uncertainty? How do I engage in difficult emotions? How do I engage in difficult situations? Because the brain is a pattern detector, we live our lives only through the lens of our own patterns. Okay, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say here is what happens to leaders a lot of times is and this is very natural, is we start to see the world in situations. We start to see, okay, this person said this, okay, they missed this deadline, okay, they did this, okay, we're having this problem, okay, we need to, ameliorate this staffing issue. Are those things valid? Absolutely. But I can only fix that situation. I can only help that situation through the portal of my own brain. Okay. Mm-hmm. Everyone has what I call a root belief that surrounds their pain. What I mean here is everyone has it's a very black and white basic statement, like, people don't listen to me. I can never get what I want. I am unsafe. I am unheard. I always say it's important for us to find our own personal brand of this statement about our own inadequacy. Mm-hmm. If we can figure out what this is. So for example, if I feel like I am unheard, let's say I grew up in a family where it was really difficult to get heard. So I now carry that pattern or that coding in me. That's going to show up in my leadership. And it's going to show up when people start to tell me, hey, Julia, like, I don't really think this is working out for the team. I think we need to go in a different direction. So long as that pattern is in me, and that pattern is really the brain will automatically move my behavior in such a way to defend against the violation of that pattern. Meaning I won't be able to hear them because I will automatically feel like they are not hearing me. Mm-hmm. So long as I don't, and this is like, if you're a leader, I think, what they say, like, with great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. You got to clean up this energy. Because I do a lot of work with leadership teams. Like I do work with teams and C-suites. I do work with individual leaders. And people who you look from the outside and you think that person has it all together, we're also human. People have ones like, I am inept, I am unheard, people don't listen to me, nobody likes me. That thing leads. Now, you might want to say, okay, Julia, that's ridiculous. You're a grown woman. You're a leader. Of course, people are listening to you. That is the cognitive system of the brain. The emotional or the affective system of the brain, number one, operates mostly out of our conscious awareness. And number two, dwarfs in power the cognitive system of our brain. So we as a leader have a responsibility to feel out the energetics of our triggers. Mm-hmm. I just dumped a ton on you. Is this making sense?
Well, it is, right? What went through my head is sometimes when we're working with large, companies and we're in a C-suite situation, sometimes we'll be like, everything will be going great. And then something happens and all of a sudden there's all this emotion, right? This one person will be like, and they'll just go off on something. And we're always sitting there going, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it wasn't manifested here through anything we did. So what you just went through really makes a lot of sense, right? We must have triggered something from either a past experience that they had or their childhood. I mean, I'm going to jokingly say, right, like mommy issues. We use that term kind of in a defaming way, but like he had something in his past, right, that's causing a triggered reaction. And oftentimes we have to pause, right, stop a meeting or something and be like, hey, can we just talk about this? Like, because we don't think, this really is relevant to that. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, let me tell you, I guess not. But the last project or this, that, and this happened, and they'll have a war story, right? That obviously damaged them in some way. And we just triggered it and manifested it in a meeting, and I can be emotionally insensitive, apparently. At least my wife tells me that. And sometimes I'll be like, it doesn't apply, right? Like, stop bringing that forward. It's not applicable here, which is the wrong answer, I'm sure. But it's interesting when you went through that, because that's what went through my head is like, now I understand why sometimes people react. And it's not relevant in that moment, but it's because of what they're carrying with them.
Totally. And I gotta say this. So I, first of all, completely I do this work, and sometimes I even get frustrated. Like, that's not really what we're talking about here. Or, because there's urgency, right? It's like you only have so much time and you really want to fix the issue. But I will say it's like if you don't deal with the emotional system of the brain, it does not work. It's like if you cut off my legs and tell me to run a mile, no, everyone will be like, that doesn't work, right? Like, how can I get the universe to divide by 0? Meanwhile, the universe is like, you can't divide by 0. And I'm like, yes, universe, but just one more time, 5 divides. It's like, you can't divide by 0. So, and I think part of the reason is because there's been this cultural mythology that we could just suck it up. And it's just, it doesn't make any sense. The lungs are there to breathe. The heart is there to beat. The brain, the nervous system is there to create meaning. And the only way you create meaning is through the affective system of the brain. In other words, nothing in your life has any meaning until it hits the affective system of the brain, right?
Yep.
So part of this is like, I'm going to give you a few examples. So I worked in a large organization, and you can just see the disconnect. And if leaders could really kind of turn the volume up on their emotional intelligence, they would enjoy their job so much more. They would become so much more powerful. And it's just a few minor tweaks can make a night and day difference. So I worked in this large organization, and they were growing. And so they are starting to have, this is obviously pre-pandemic, starting to have a space problem. So leadership got together and they made what they thought was a very pragmatic decision, where they were going to take people out of their offices and put them in cubes. You would have thought that leadership dropped a nuclear bomb on the place. People were incensed. Leadership knew that they were angry, but the feeling was like they're being ridiculous, like they still have their space, they still have their computer, they still have their keyboard. But the fundamental human energy that we do all of our transactions in is a language of emotion. You cannot get around energies of fairness. You cannot get around energies of justice. You cannot get around energies of respect. If someone came into your house, Michael, and said, you know what, I'm just going to take up space in your living room. What are you complaining about? You got five other rooms in this house. I'm just going to hang out here in your living room. You'd be like, no, it doesn't work that way. Even if, like, on the most rational level, you could be like, well, okay, I guess I'm not in this room that much. And you'd just be like, this doesn't feel good. You don't belong here. This was my thing. So when leaders act in a way that even if they don't mean it this way, because one of the things that does break my heart is 99.999% of the leadership teams I work with are lovely human beings who are working desperately to try to get everyone happy. So they make a decision, but they just forget to close. It's like, I made this gorgeous you would think I'm a gymnast. I'm not. I keep using all these gymnastics metaphors. But, I make this beautiful vault move, and I stumble a little bit on the landing. And then we totally toss away all the hard work I did to make this beautiful vault move, and I just get obsessed with not sticking the landing. So my point here is, if leaders could just be like, what does this sound like in the brain of another human being? And the great way to do this is go, how would I feel if I walked in tomorrow and someone said, this is no longer your office? Surprise.
Yeah. It's so cool, right? Because we do similar, it sounds like we operate in the similar areas of helping leaders, senior leaders. We do a lot of organizational change management, right? And I always tell senior leaders when they're like, well, this is just how it's going to be. I'm like, well, we've surveyed the members that are going to be affected, right? We've done interviews, we've done all this change management. And, and they're like, that just takes too long. And I'm like, you don't have to like how your team is feeling or how your company is feeling, but this is how they're feeling, right? So you don't have to like it, but, so here's the consequences of taking that action versus taking this action. This action over here will actually take much longer because of the resistance, the turnover, the cost. Like, people aren't going to just sit there and go, yeah, take my stuff. They're going to go, I can go across the street to your competitor with all your trade secrets. And, and I can go work over there and they will give me an office. It's, you just can't appear insensitive. Employees, I think, are becoming smarter and more emotionally intelligent themselves in who they want to work for as an employer. So as a leadership team, you used to just be able to issue edicts from upon high and your will was done. Now, when you do an act and lead like that, people leave, right? The Great Resignation is a great example of people just not taking it anymore. And all these companies that are like, oh my gosh, I have all this real estate. We need to bring people back to work, even though we've proven without a shadow of a doubt that we can operate 100% remote. We're going to bring everyone back because we have all this real estate without taking the pulse of, do your people want to come back? Mm-hmm. Do they maybe want to come back in some sort of a hybrid way? Without being insensitive to that, when you mandate that they come back, you know, the penalty of that without taking the pulse or being emotionally intelligent to your team is that you're probably going to experience a really big spike in turnover because people don't want to come back.
You're making my brain explode. You're saying so many things that I think I agree with, and they get me excited. So I loved what you first started saying when it's very common. Impatience is a thing. We all experience it. And if you really think about impatience, it feels bad in the body. So when leaders start to say it just needs to be this way, I find it, the scientist in me finds it very healing to take out these ideas of good or bad. Typically when leaders get in that kind of emotional wave or that emotional frequency, it's because they're starting to feel kind of urgency, pressure. They're starting to feel anxious. My father would always say, though, how long does it take to make a 3-minute egg? Takes 3 minutes. I only got 2 minutes and 57 seconds. It still takes 3 minutes. Well, what if I want to give 5? It still takes 3 minutes, right? So how long does it take to move human behavior? It takes as long as it takes, and it will go a lot faster if you work. I talk a lot about the boundaries of the brain. Mm-hmm. If you work within the boundaries of human behavior, and the brain gives a brilliant, brilliant blueprint about how people want to be treated. And anytime we try to cut corners on fairness, listening to people. So I will tell you that the number one issue that drives every single interpersonal problem on the planet, the brain has 2 powerful and competing drives. The first drive is the drive for connection. And this is neurobiological, the way we need water and we need oxygen, right? So the infant, we literally learn as infants, another human being regulates our nervous system. We now know about interpersonal neurobiology in our homes. Our spouses, for better and for worse, regulate or dysregulate our nervous system. Now there's starting to be really interesting stuff about coworkers. So when we're saying like, this person's driving me crazy, something's happening to your cortisol level, something's happening to your breathing rate, something happened to skin conductance, okay? So we have a drive for connection. But the competing drive is the drive for choice. So another way to say this is independence, freedom, autonomy. Now, companies have really gotten this piece down, right? This is this whole thing about employee choice and really kind of giving employees a consumer-grade experience and letting them have all these individual electives. It's the recognition of the neurobiological signature, like I need to be able to be a most powerful agent in my own life. These drives come into conflict all the time because now we're going to play a game where I look for my annoying cell phone that's going off. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. My apologies for that. Okay.
No problem.
I really want to be connected to you. You just have to do it exactly as I want you to do it, and there's not going to be any problem here. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, then I totally forget that you are the main action figure in your own life. So it's this drive for connection and choice that if you really start to see it through that lens, you start to go, oh my God, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. We, here, RPIs, we're about 170 people now. We put our entire team through, we've done it before, right? We've done the Myers-Briggs and all this personality mumbo jumbo. I'm not necessarily a big fan of really any of them. But I experienced one called Real Colors, at a previous company, and I'm the biggest cheerleader for real colors, only because it categorizes everybody into 4 colors, right? And it's not only about learning about yourself, but it's learning the characteristics of other people. What do they need, right? To know, like, okay, how do I communicate? Well, this person's the opposite style, right? So I can't communicate that way if I expect to be heard by that person or received receptively. I might need to adapt my style a little bit, right? And it's the same thing that all these other personality tests do, except they really focus on the self, not necessarily on the outward team approach. And there's just too many. I'm an AEIOU 1, 2, 3, 4. I have no idea and I don't care, right? But I know I'm an orange, right? So I'm an orange. I'm entrepreneurial. There's all things about me. So when people know that they talk to me, they know that I'm going to be like intense. I'm going to be excited. I'm going to be positive. I'm going to be like, hey, can we have this conversation while we're skydiving? Let's go, and it's really allowed our company to work better together because we take the time, we have it in our signature blocks, right? Everybody knows I'm the highest level of orange. I am maxed out. I have almost no blue. Blue is the human, the caring, the hugging. Because I'm so gregarious as an orange, you might think
I was just going to say that surprises me because I think I have very good interpersonal instincts. You seem very warm. You seem very comfortable around people. So I'm surprised to hear you say, I'm not familiar with this orange-blue system, but
yep.
You're saying you don't really have any of the humanistic qualities?
I'm really low. The other ones are gold, which is like your type A, list writer, very organized. Project managers tend to be golds. And green is like your analysts, all about data, your programmers, your software guys, your geeks. Those are all greens. Your oranges are just kind of out there, the rule breakers. And then your blues are your people, right? And it's, I'm totally opposite spectrum. But it's really allowed our company to like have that high level understanding. And we've just came so much closer as a firm and as a company and how we work together and how we communicate. It's been awesome. And everything you just said about like that need for connection, right? That's really what we were trying to solve without knowing that that's what we were trying to solve. But we wanted people to connect better together so that they could work better together. And, we don't want them to be friends if most of them are friends, but that's just a side benefit. So it just makes so much sense when you lay out this drive for connection.
And I think, too, what then happens is I think, how like, I don't know, my mother would always say like, the only thing you can control is your own behavior, Julia. But then if you really think about childhood, you made this kind of thing like where you're saying like, oh, we kind of make this pejorative or this like a little bit derogatory thing about mommy issues. I want to bring a little bit of grace into this. Mm-hmm. If you take a neurobiological lens to human development, what happens to the brain in the early years of life is astounding. So the brain is, I think, the most magnificent machine in the entire world, right? Mm-hmm. And the machinery of that brain, it's something astounding, like 1 million neural connections every second in years 0 through 3. Okay. So if you think about so if the brain is a pattern detector and you think about all of this coding, all of this foundation, all these patterns being set, and what's the one skill that's not around from 0 to 3? Language, mm-hmm. right? So the idea that we would then have access to this, we don't have conscious verbal linear access to this. So all this stuff is getting kind of laid down about who we are, about who's safe, about power, about who responds, about whose job it is. So then when we get to be leaders, we unconsciously remember our parents used to say, sit down. Our teachers used to say, stand up. Our coaches used to say, do this. Our grandparents used to say, don't do that. So then when we show up in leadership, experience, you could talk, knowledge doesn't change shit, excuse my language. It mm-hmm. has to be experiential. The brain is an experiential organ. That's how we learn, right? So I show up in my leadership and I start telling people, you should be more engaged. Now, I might not say this directly, but that's definitely the energy, right? I work with leadership teams. The number one thing they want to talk to me about is how do I make people more engaged? Here's what I say. Your job is not to motivate them. Your job is not to inspire them. They're looking at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, your job is to be motivated. Your job is to be inspired by your own work, about this own organization, about your own life, and then trust that other people will catch on to the energetics of your emotions. If you think about the leaders that you really like being around in your life, that you like listening to, that you are lit up like a friggin' Christmas tree around, it's the ones that are on fire about their own life. In other words, we talk about emotion, and this is, again, neuroscientific. Emotion is a thing of contagion. When we're around people that are really there for the work with a capital W, we are caught fire by their inspiration. We are caught fire by their engagement. So that my job as a leader is not to inspire you. My job as a leader is to self-lead myself to my own inspiration. Well, now, shit, that's really hard, because it's really easy for me to think about how to roll out another social rewards program or how to get another app. So it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I mean, you're challenging. I always say, right, leadership is hard. And if it isn't hard, you're not doing it right. And I always challenge all the leaders, right, to just be better. It's that is hard. Self-reflection and understanding and kind of, I always say I do really well at painting a vision, right? But then I trust my team. I don't have weekly calls with my team. I don't have all this. Like I hired the right people. I trust them to do a job, and our team delivers amazing results. And there's no micromanagement and such because of that trust, and because I think I do a pretty good job painting that vision of what it is we're trying to do. And it gets them excited. They jump in and they're like, we're going to do all this stuff. And at first it was like they felt the need to check with me. It was really weird. They were like, hey, Michael, we're going to do this, that, and this. And we think it does this. And I'm like, great, sounds good. And then after a while they were like, so we don't have to check in with you? I'm like, no, you're empowered, go forth. And they just love it. So we've been talking.
Because that's really amazing. I think the number one thing that human beings want, I think they want to be reminded of their own power.
I like that.
And what you just said, when you're like, I really trust you. I really see you in your power. I really see you in your agency. I really see you in your ability to possess yourself. This idea of self-possession. People, at first it can be terrifying, right? Especially if we're used to being like, you're coloring outside of the lines, you're coloring outside of the lines, and then we're around leaders who don't do that. But when we see like, okay, I really get to come for my freedom. Here's the paradox. The more you allow me to come for my freedom, the more I want to connect to you. We get it twisted. We say, damn it, get over here and connect to me, and I'll give you your freedom. You can't get the math on that to work. Universe, how do I divide by 0? It doesn't work. So it's like when I really let go of you, and I really do it, the energetics are true because we speak in a language of energy most natively. People will come to me because they will see that I'm safe enough for them to be free. And this is why you hear people talking so much about authenticity at work.
I love it. We've spent most of the time talking about work, right? And I've taken so many notes. For those of you that keep seeing me look down, I'm just like, I feel like I'm in class because I'm just filling up paper with all kinds of cool things that I want to follow up on and do some research on. But personal relationships, the same concept, right, kind of applies. Right? We have the same pain, we have the same powers, we have the same, it's almost like, but it's harder, right? Especially in like a husband-wife situation. It's just, to me, more amplified because it's such a microcosm. There's nowhere for me to hide, right?
Oh my God, how much time you got? So yes. So, oh my God. Okay. So the most powerful relationship on the planet is the parent-child relationship. And that, again, is not a statement of philosophy. It's a statement of neurobiology. So leadership, the most powerful version of leadership is parent leadership. The most complex relationship on the planet is the long-term adult romantic relationship. And the reasons are for exactly what you're saying. This person has access to my nervous system like no one else. This person is supposed to soothe me, but they're supposed to do it exactly as I want. Now, here's the real kind of rub of romantic relationships. Most of us pick partners that the reason we pick them is the reason we sometimes want to stab them. So, for example, like in my marriage, so freedom is a huge value of mine. So my husband is someone who really allows me a lot of freedom. But then if I get in a certain mood, so even if that works 80% of the time, 70% of the time, on the days when I'm like, you're not paying enough attention, you don't really care, you don't really see me, the same thing that is the very thing that regulates my nervous system the majority of the time becomes the thing that if I'm not powerful enough, I'll let it destroy my relationship, number one. Number two is I want to go back to what I said earlier about really kind of cleaning up these early life where we get our coding tangled. If it's in me that I am unwanted, so a lot of times we grew up in homes where there was, who knows, a lot of mental illness, a lot of addiction, and even families that were doing wonderful, life is hard. So our parents were distracted by their own stuff. They worked, whatever. So I got it in me on some level that I'm unwanted. That thing's going to get triggered at work, and it's going to get triggered with the fire of 1,000 suns in my marriage. Mm-hmm. So when you don't load the dishwasher, tell me if this resonates. Couples do this. So I do a lot of work in all systems. So I do it in organizational systems, team systems, and marital and family systems. So the couple will say, someone will start a fight. You didn't take out the trash the right way. You didn't load the dishwasher the right way. And what they're really energetically saying, and a lot of times we don't have conscious awareness of it, number one. And number two, if we do have conscious awareness, those of us who are emotionally intelligent enough, it can feel so vulnerable to say, hey, I'm feeling right now like I'm not really getting enough of your attention and I miss you and I feel lonely. Instead, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Loading the dishwasher like some kind of wild animal.
Yeah.
So to take but do you see how much more powerful it is? And then I got to remember, it's my marriage. How do I want to show up in my marriage? So I think a lot of times we think it becomes a zero-sum game. We're like, I'm not going to give that to you. I'm not going to, and it becomes very kind of this transactional thing that unfortunately doesn't work in relationships.
It's interesting to me. You mentioned the parent-child relationship. I used to think, I pride myself on my ability to lead teams in a corporate environment. And so I just thought, okay, I have kids. That's a team. I'm going to lead teams the same way that I lead at work. I'm just going to, my wife will tell you, like, we have no rules, right? I call it bumper bowling of parenting, meaning don't do my other famous rule that I tell everyone who works for me, as well as my kids, don't do stupid shit, right? You're all intelligent adults or you're all kids. Like, the difference between right and wrong. Don't do stupid shit. And it's kind of worked well, right? None of my kids are all over 18. They're still alive. They haven't been in jail. They're all doing really well. But I was managing and empowering them very much the same way that I was managing teams at work. And after kind of learning what I've learned here, which is crazy how much, I've kind of learned, and hopefully the listeners have too, just in this short period of time, like I'm like second guessing some of that. I'm like, oh, I probably wasn't as emotionally intelligent to their needs and connected with them, when they needed me into, as well as I probably should have, because I just homogeneously help me, doctor, homogeneously, kind of applied this approach to, managing a team, whether it be at corporate or at home.
You know what, though? Like, I
Interesting.
just want to apply a little bit of gentleness. So first of all, I think the human experience is a non-dualistic experience. In other words, our power comes with our pain. Our joy comes with our sorrow. Night
Right.
comes with day. So no human being can be for another human being all things at all times. Number one. Number two, it sounds like you gave your children a gorgeous gift, if I'm understanding you correctly, of their ability to claim their autonomy and their independence, and that they really saw that you trusted them. Okay. Were there probably moments where they, for example, were like, it would be nicer to be like held right now, meaning like there's more kind of emotional reading of me, emotional aware. Sure. But those same things, if they're held in the right way, can actually become the moments that we develop our own resilience. If my parent, and this is kind of the problem of, if you take it to the extreme, helicopter parenting, helicopter, I've seen boards that are kind of helicopter boards. I've seen leaders that are helicopter leaders. The problem with helicopter leaders is then, well, why would I have to develop my own competency if you're just going to come in here and fix it all the time for me?
Yeah.
So the pain, and this is why I say, I haven't said this yet here, but so my job most fundamentally is I'm a trauma. I've worked with trauma. I've worked with torture survivors. I've worked with child soldiers. I've worked with combat veterans. So trauma is horrific. That's the point, right? It's pain. But pain oftentimes, like once it's happened and we don't have a time machine, it becomes this holy messenger. Am I going to come into my feelings of abandonment? Am I going to come into my feelings of loss? Am I going to come into my feelings of inadequacy? Am I going to come into my feelings of betrayal and just keep avoiding the truth of my own life? Or am I going to come into that pain and become remarkably more powerful than I was? So I do think that, again, like if I call it the emotional shake. If I'm trying to figure out how to get the 30-pound dumbbell up and I never have, like, you're going to watch my biceps shake, 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 shake. But the function of that shake is actually there's a reason we call it growing pains. Now, can you overwhelm it? If I have never run a day in my life and then you're like, okay, Julia, 26 miles, go. Yes, you can absolutely injure the physical system, like you can injure the emotional system. But also, people this is why I love the human spirit. I work with people who have absolutely every reason to never get up again. And they get up, they rise, and they rise only because they say, I rise because I say I rise. And a lot of times they don't even know why they're rising. They just know they can't stay down. How do you explain that?
I love it. There is, for those of you that have seen my note sheets, right, when I have a guest on, as we go through the topics, I start crossing them off, right? So I know, like, okay, this is what I wanted to talk to the guest about, and this is what I've crossed off. So for those of you watching the video, I had like 8 things I wanted to talk to Dr. Julia about, and I've crossed one thing off. Which means, like, this is such a powerful subject, right? And it's hard to talk about the brain and everything that it does, and talk about it in the context of leadership and business and personal development and just being a better person. To talk about it in the context of understanding how to have better relationships. There's so much more that I want to talk about. So I think we're gonna have to do a part 2.
Or part 7 more parts, right?
Yes, yeah. We'll do a series. It's awesome. So I want to thank you for all the work you're doing. First of all, just, to bring kind of the power of the brain forward. You have a really cool style about you that's, you're right. At first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go talk to a neuropsychologist and I'm going to not know, like, it's going to be just awkward. And you have such a great style about yourself that just allows us to talk about something as cool, magnificent, and complex as the brain, and just have a dialogue about it, which is really awesome. So thank you for the work that you're doing and the way that you share the knowledge and help people understand.
Well, I feel the same about you. You made me feel right at ease. And I am so genuinely thankful that you're willing to have this conversation with me. Like if I had 1,000 lifetimes to live, I would be talking about human pain and human power. And so to be able to have a forum like this, I thank you too for inviting me here.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely work to reschedule you so we can finish the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things I wanted to talk to you about. But we did get one of the questions answered, which was around in the very beginning, around the correlation of intelligence and emotional intelligence, which is really cool. We talked about mental health. I really love the drive for connection. It makes light bulbs go off in my head, the drive for choice. So many cool things. I literally have a page filled with notes. So thank you for taking the time. And like I say to the listeners, look for a part 2 to this. We'll work to get Dr. Julia rescheduled. You have you're accessible. People can find you out there. Where do they find you?
Absolutely. So I love obviously having these types of conversations. I love people's questions and comments. The best place to find me, like most people these days, is on social media. Pretty straightforward. You can find me at Dr. Julia DiGangi on Instagram, Dr. Julia DiGangi on Facebook, and Dr. Julia DiGangi on LinkedIn. And I have a book obviously coming forth later this year, and I am dropping a lot of content. So if this idea of emotional power and leadership in your brain lights you up, I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. And thank you again for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you.